Hello and welcome back. I'm Ken. We're visiting with Mike. Mike, you gave a detailed outline to cover some of the steps that we've talked about
Yes.
in recent videos. I put that in the description for the last video.
Okay.
What ideas come next?
Well, the thing that I thought I would do is, the each of those cases that I listed before go through similar kind of phases. And before I cover all of them with Nehemiah, I thought it would be good to see how those items that are listed on that checklist are applicable to other places. So when we look at each of the turnarounds, there's essentially one thing that I would call preliminaries. Preliminaries are kind of background information, both about the leader and the environment in which the event takes place. So in the case of Nehemiah, is the background with the exile and also the story behind the drive to rebuild the wall kind of thing. It was not an easy task. So anyway, there's preliminaries. And then after that, there's a phase that I would say is getting started. And that phase is not necessarily doing things, but how do you lay things out to get things done? And then once you've got that pretty well set in place, then you've got the issue of execution. So I like to concentrate on the first two to see how it applies in the other processes. Um, Going back to the checklist, one of the items that I had in there was called credentials. And it's more not credentials of the individual, but credentials to be able to perform the task. In other words, first thing is the boss commitment. And the reason it may be kind of obvious, but it's not necessarily true. I've been in a situation where as a consultant that I've been hired by a parent company, but the local management didn't want any part of it. So what do you do then? So it's not a given. The second thing is the resource requirements. In the case of Nehemiah, he had troops to escort him. He had limb timber to rebuild the place. He had a variety of things that would help him to get things done. Then you asked for letters for the people around the area announcing that this is what he was going to do. So in other words, there was a letter to essentially, I don't know what that was his intent, but it's to quiet what I would call the chihuahuas, the people that feel threatened by change that are outside of the organization, and they surely don't want you to succeed. So they'll do everything that they can, as we will see in Nehemiah, to undermine your efforts. Uh, so you need to have an announcement to make sure that you placate all of those people out there that are not necessarily on your side. And then obviously then a clear charter which says this is what you're going to do. You're going to rebuild the wall. Then after that, once you got that, then Nehemiah went into making his first-hand observations. And again, it's not an obvious kind of thing because, yeah, he knew already that the place was a mess. So why does he have to go out and see it? So there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do to be able to assess the situation. And then once he's got his first-hand knowledge, then how do you energize the base? How do you get people to want to go to the promised land? And we see that, especially with Moses and Exodus, that a lot of times people want to revert back to the old system. Okay, I'd rather be in Egypt than I would be going through the things that we're going through right now. So, yeah, how do you energize people to want to go there and to be part of it? And then you have the implementation, and there, that's a reference to the litany of names that are listed in chapter 3 that describe that this one and his family built this section, and this one did this, and this one did that. So you've got a real definition of responsibility. Who's going to do what? Then you have the issue of ownership. People actually did it. They said, "Hey, that's I'm responsible for that." Then you've got also the issue of subsidiarity, which says Nehemiah doesn't seem to be interacting with each of those leaders to make sure that they get the job done. He trusts them and they're going to do it. So you have a total delegation of responsibility to the people on the local level. So all of that you could look at as empowerment. Empowerment is the practice of giving employees autonomy and control over their work. And that's essentially what he did, is by each of the families doing their thing, or in some cases it was towns or trades, each of them has some clear definition of and control over what they were doing. And then transparency is an issue, because how do you keep everybody on target, kind of thing? How do you keep people accountable? So you have that process. So when we can look at that, we can look at influences at the different cases that I mentioned before. And the first one that I would look at is Ghosn. And the thing that strikes you first is that each of those cases, Nissan and Grameen Bank with Yunus and Bratton and Rene PD and Escalante and his schools, is there are different size of operation. Nehemiah, its Jerusalem wall is pretty well contained. Ghosn with Nissan, he's got 140,000 employees all over the world. How do you get your hands around that? It's a challenge. Then you've got the other one with Yunus, where he's trying to get the women who are doing menial craft, building baskets and weaving baskets, and trying to get them out of the poverty cycle that they're in by providing a loan to be able to make more money at what they're doing. So they're already showing some initiative, but the system is rigged against them, kind of thing. So how does he break that cycle? So all of those guys, it's different. Bratton is another story. He's got 40,000 policemen. That's as big as Bellingham, just in policemen. So each one of those guys have different situations, and yet you still have the same aspect of the startup and the setting up the system. So I like to go and look at Ghosn and Nissan. How is he empowered? Well, the president of Renault asked him to take the job of managing the turnaround at Nissan. So it was a direct contact. He didn't seek it, he didn't ask for it. They told him. And the president added to a bit of pressure and said, if you turn it down, then we won't do what we're supposed to do, or we should be doing. And the deal is that they would give $5.5 billion, that's a lot of money, to Nissan to help them with their cash crisis, on the condition that Renault would be running things. And then the challenge is, from a background point of view, is how do you operate in a different culture? because the Japanese have their way of doing things and the French have their way of doing things. And if you come in and do things with a heavy foot, guess what? You build more resentment than cooperation. So you got a challenge. Um, so he waited until he was empowered, and empowered was, in his case, to be named chief operating officer and put on the board of Nissan. And then he was in a position of authority. So that's one aspect of, the empowerment kind of thing. Then how did he go about doing it? Well, he didn't have families, but what he did is set up 5 what he calls CCT. It's small task forces for each of the different disciplines. So you had some in charge of what do you call it? Finance, accounting, purchasing, sales, product design. Anyway, there's 9 of those kinds of things. And each one of those committees was staffed by 10 people. And they, out of those 10 people, they had 2 leaders. One, yeah, exactly. That was my reaction. Boy, that's a struggle if you have 2 people. And the reason for that is he had one person was a person essentially responsible online for the performing the things that are in their discipline. So in other words, if you're in purchasing, the guy in charge of purchasing was involved in running the task force. And then with him was another person that they called the pilot, who was really the driving force or the leader of the process. So there was a clear delineation between the 2 leaders. One was responsible for the running of it, and the other one implicitly was implied that it would be, it was in his best interest to implement the recommendation that the task force was going to do. So anyway, so he set up that, so that he delegated the authority to those groups to come up, and he set some sense of urgency. He said 3 months. Initially, he wanted 2 months, but then he relented and said 3 months.
Wow.
So it's when you've got 140,000 people, you've got countries like England and US and Japan and a whole bunch of different places, you've got a problem. So anyway, so that's the part of the getting thing organized, I guess you could say. Then the next question is how did he do his personal assessment of the situation? Like Nehemiah, he went that night and visited the wall. Well, he has, and I'm quoting some things out of a book that he wrote. There's several books written about that turnaround, one by him and several from other people. But anyway, the first thing he says is a primary assessment, first observing realities firsthand. So he realizes that you can't have people giving him a report. He has to go and see it. In one of his paragraphs, he mentions that he saw over 1,000 people. That's a ton of people
That's a
that
lot of people.
you
Yeah.
talk to. Okay, so if you say half an hour each, 10 hour a day, that's 20 a day. That's 50 days. Well, that's what he did. Well, during the 3 months that the task forces were doing their thing. So getting in the field quickly, meeting people, shortening the distance with others at all levels, mini brainstorming sessions with executives and line workers. So there again, is covering a lot of people at every level of the organization. So he gets the perspective of everybody. So when we look at that, you see, okay, you can see very quickly that his ability to turn around the situation was based on facts that he gathered himself, not somebody else suggested. As an aside, when we were doing consulting assignments, one of the things that we would do is to say to people before we took an assignment, first we want to spend 3-4 days talking to your people, and we'll give you a report and we'll charge you for it. It's not a freebie. So, and what we found is that by us doing it ourselves, we found out some things that management was totally oblivious.
Right.
That they're totally that's why you can't depend on somebody's perception or what the facts are, and that's why we were interested in facts. We weren't looking about blame. We weren't looking at you want to see what the situation is.
It's time once again to draw it to a conclusion. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm forming the idea that this applies to very large organizations, very small
Yes.
organizations, manufacturing,
Yep.
other kinds of businesses,
Yep.
churches, families.
Yeah.
It applies to groups of all kinds. And
Yeah.
thank you for these leadership principles. Anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
Well, in conclusion, is that the important thing through all that, and it's just one thing that struck me when I was reading again his book, is the importance of people. He realized that the only way to get things done is with people and through people. It's not by him writing a memo and say, here this, shape up or else. That doesn't cut it. So you really have to energize the base from top to bottom. And it's like a chain. If you have one group or one person who doesn't want to participate, you got a problem because it's a weak link. So that's the way we'll cover more of this about his doing, and then we'll look at Yunus and we'll look at Yunus next time.
I look forward to those. The importance of people. That's what this is about. Thank you very much for that conclusion. And we'll talk another day.
Very good.